Okay, so Ben's still there. Good. All right. So we had improvised a little bit, and so I'll make my presentation relatively short because we want to talk about some of the things that the Institute's doing. So if you have to leave at any time during this, feel free. Your brothers and sisters, so you're all immediately forgiven. Ego te absolvo. I've already talked a little bit about the history of the Institute, that we came up with the idea a few years back. We were in Berlin a couple years back, myself, Michael Naughton, Sayed Javed Miri, and Mehdi Shariati, and we decided what we wanted to do in a couple years' time, have a conference, our first conference. In the meantime, we took a journal that we have all published in that was started by Syed Javad back in 2010, I believe, called Islamic Perspective. We transformed it into Critical Perspectives. The first edition just came out. They were supposed to be here for the conference, but then I got an email on Wednesday saying there was a delay. So that's not happening. They're not here, but you can find them online if you go to the Institute's website. It's there. And you're all more than welcome to, send in your articles, whatnot, for consideration in the journal. So it'd be amazing. All the editors, basically, and we're all very friendly. So you don't get ugly reviews, constructive reviews, right? Constructive reviews. There's no devilish reviewer, too, in any of us. So, and so we're thinking, for the next conference, we would like to do it someplace more centralized, possibly Istanbul. And then Laurenti has brought up Bucharest as a possibility. And so if, you have any suggestions that you think would be a good place to have, because we have good connections there and they have good infrastructure for us to work with and someone to partner with, then, let us know. That'd be wonderful. More than happy to do it, whether that's Europe, Middle East, Southeast Asia, Malaysia, right? Yeah. That would be great. So just let us know about that. It's interdisciplinary, the Institute, as well as the journal. So you've got philosophers, you've got sociologists, you've got historians, you've got anthropologists, and we deeply encourage all of the disciplines, as long as it's critical. There should be some critical geist to it, right? We need to say something about not only about what it is in the world, but what it ought to be, right? And make those kind of critiques and those kind of suggestions. So that's what we're ultimately trying to do. It's very, how should one say, we're not competitive in the sense that we're all going to be fighting with each other. It's collaborative, right? That's the spirit of it, and that's the spirit from which the Institute and the journal comes from. Also, this is a side note because it's not directly a part of the Institute, but I also own a publishing house, and a lot of the individuals who are in the Institute have published books in the publishing house as well. So that's also something to think about. And Karimo's his second book just came out, I think last week, on the history of Islamic reform in India. So, and those books are available throughout the world once we publish them. So, yep, good stuff. So, okay, on to my theme here. What does it mean to be critical in an age of social disintegration? Okay, so, critical thinking, of course, is a buzzword in academia, especially in the last couple of decades. Always, in my institution, we have to say something about critical thinking in our syllabi. And I always ask my students what they mean by critical thinking. They usually don't have any idea. And then I tell them, well, as soon as your professor tells you to think critically, you need to say you first, show me how it's done, right? And I guarantee they're going to come up with a blank, right? Because the professors themselves oftentimes aren't very critical. So to then say to our students to do what we're incapable of doing or unwilling to do seems to me very problematic. Oftentimes, how we portray critical thinking is simply in binary oppositions, right? To somehow look out in the world and say, okay, here's this and here's this. What are the merits of this? What are the merits of that? And what do you like? What do you conform to in that sense? But they never talk about based on what? What are the first principles? Why would you conform to this? Why would you conform to that? And why are these two things the only options, right? Why isn't there that creativity, as we were talking about, Martha, to create something that doesn't exist yet, right? So again, oftentimes critical thought isn't very critical at all. It's simply choosing from that which already exists. It's a form of neo-scholasticism. And for me, it's a form of non-thinking, right? And you all remember what Hannah Arendt said about the problem, right? The problem of modernity isn't bad thinking, if you will. It's non-thinking, the inability to think, right? And that's what you have oftentimes with this critical thinking that's not critical. But critical thinking is also in many cases a psychoanalytic process. It's a process by which we have to interrogate ourselves, thinking against thinking, thinking against ourselves, right? If I say this, I have to think to myself, I'm talking about critical thinking. Why did this come to mind, right? Why is this an issue for me to talk about critical thinking, right? So I have to interrogate myself as to the reasons why I am bringing to the top of the discussion this idea of critical thought, right? So it's a psychoanalytic practice to self-interrogate. And I think, and if you're going to be critical of the world, you have to be critical of yourself. I'm always leery about people who never make a mistake, but the world is horrible, but they're a saint, right? That's always suspicious. So for Hegel, as you know, very much in the Hegelian tradition, Hegel is, in his science of logic, he has this Aufheben, or determinate negation, right? Determinate negation, of course, we always bastardize it into thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, and of course that's not Hegel's language, right? But if you read the science of logic, Aufheben has something to do to get well beyond the binary, the lack of imagination in the binary. And he says if we're going to make scientific progress, and he means not natural sciences, positivistic sciences, the way we think of it, more philosophical sciences, that you have to do not only the deconstruction of society and deconstruction of dominant narratives and deconstruction of thought, you have to also create. And that's what we forget. Right, so right now we're in a condition where a lot of academics, a lot of scholars, a lot of philosophers are really good at deconstructing things, but they're really bad at constructing things, right? So they're only getting half this dialectical thought. They're only getting the deconstructive part. And this is deeply problematic because once you deconstruct and don't construct, what do you have left? Right? What do you have left? And that's deeply problematic for a lot of different ways, which I'll get into in a minute. So, binary thought and social disintegration. This social disintegration is in what they call in German the Stimmung, right, or the Tonalität profonde in French. It's a Heideggerian term, right? It's oftentimes translated as to mood. The mood of society right now is social disintegration, right? And binary thinking feeds into social disintegration within nations and between nations, right? Social disintegration, you can think of it as a dissolving of the bonds that keep society together, right? It keeps states interconnected. It keeps people open to the other. And when those bonds start to dissolve, the antagonisms that we would normally see are reasons to talk to each other, enter into discourse, to try to find solutions to, actually become reasons for conflict. Right? Differences become fuel, if you will, for conflict as opposed to figuring out things, how to do things. What happens when you have massive social disintegration in society? What you leave open is the condition by which the aristocratic law of nature becomes dominant. The aristocratic law of nature, right? The right of the powerful to destroy the powerless, right? The right of the predator to devour the prey, right? Once those bonds are torn apart, especially international norms, moral norms that we talked about, ethical norms, policy norms between states, when they disintegrate, what do you have left is the violence of the powerful over the powerless, the aristocratic law of nature. And that is deeply problematic in a society where you have so many smaller states and countries that are struggling just to get by, and you have a handful of very powerful states. It leaves them with the ability to do whatever they want to those less powerful, less affluent states. So binary thinking, what it does, of course, is that within a country, it can tear a country apart because people start to move into those camps, right? The camp of A, the camp of B. In our country, right? Democrats, Republicans, they don't talk to each other. They hate each other's guts, except for right now with Jeffrey Epstein. Everybody's clamoring, like, release the Jeffrey Epstein file. So for once, liberals and Trumpists are agreeing on something. But by and large, they don't talk to each other. And the U.S., for instance, is deeply antagonistic, deeply divided right now because of someone like Trump who can use those divisions to propel himself into power on those divisions, right? And so the binary forms of thinking end up influencing that and encouraging that kind of disintegration of society. Now, I've already touched on this a little bit quickly about American spirit, for instance, being schizophrenic, that it's both progressive and regressive. It's both benevolent and barbaric, right? It has both of it within itself. And it's what I call the night side and the day side of America, right? So we see that night side coming out with Trump, the ugliness, the negativity, the destructiveness, the very fact that he's cutting billions out of healthcare for the poor in order to offset the cost of another tax cut for the very wealthy, right? And that is being supported in many cases by working class people, because they want to make sure that immigrants, people of color, poor people don't get what they don't deserve. So they'd rather it go to the very wealthy than go to working class people, including themselves, right? And so that's part of the night side. The day side of America is the other side of America. The other side of America, as I talked about, that is the Willensgemeinschaft that welcomes people in, that you become American by what assent to American political ideals, not to a party, but to political ideals, right? That's the social adhesive that is being torn apart by that type of binary thought, binary political thought that has become so dominant in America right now. And that in and of itself, as I said, is contributing to, within America itself, the aristocratic law of nature, the right of the powerful to devour the powerless. Now, social disintegration is also seen as an opportunity by certain scholars, talking about ECOWAS in Africa and bringing up the Eastern Europe. Alexander Dugin, who I'm editing a book on right now, often talks about this very thing, right? You have to continue to fuel social disintegration in order to deconstruct the international world order that we have post-World War II, the post-World War II international consensus, and reconstruct a multipolar model. One of the reasons why Africa is such a big thing for Russia is to say, okay, here's these Western governments, Western institutions that say, no, you have to be democratic, you have to have free markets, you have to have human rights, you have to have those things. And Russia is saying, well, in a multipolar model, we don't care if you do any of those things. You're developing your society in a different way than, say, the Western normative way, right? The way that the West is telling you have to develop your society. They're saying, no, develop it whatever way you want. And we'll guarantee and help you develop whatever way you want. And if that means you respond properly to human rights, great. If it doesn't, so what, right? And so as you're talking about, it covers up that authoritarianism, right? And so you have people like Dugin who are pushing that type of model, pushing the disintegrative model as a means to further the multipolar society, right? That's that whole business there. Now, also part of the disintegration of the multipolar, or disintegration of social bonds, is what I talked about earlier. The fact that things like international law mean next to nothing anymore, right? Unless it's to somehow punish people who are violating international norms, but are coming from poorer, less powerful countries, right? Remember when the international arrest warrant came out from the ICJ for Benjamin Netanyahu, and Senator Lindsey Graham said, it was never meant for us, right? Meaning it was never meant for prosperous, white, European, American, first world countries. It was meant for Africa, right? It was meant to get the African warlords. It was meant for Asia. It was meant for the Middle East. It wasn't meant for us, and now it's turned on us, right? International law. So we were always supposed to be outside international law. International law was supposed to be for the plebes, not the hegemons, but for the plebes, right? And now that it's turned on, in many cases, Western leaders, if we consider Israel a Western country, which is questionable, but let's go with it for a minute. Now it's well, if you're going to follow international law, we're going to sanction you, right? What Trump has announced sanctions against the International Court of Justice, right? And against Karim Khan, who's investigating the genocide in Gaza, right? So international law is even being completely disregarded, just outwardly. We all knew it was in many cases anyway, but now it's just outwardly doing it. So even though that form of social disintegration is becoming normative, and again, what does it leave? It leaves behind the aristocratic law of nature. In this case, not only a country, but an individual who's controlling that country. In the case of our case, it's Donald Trump, right? Unbelievable. So, that's him again. Yeah, that's our dude in there. So what are critical academics to do? And that's Robert De Niro, also known as Syed Javed Miri. So what are we to do? What critical academics to do? First, I think we have to acknowledge the situation. We have to be deeply honest, deeply critical, self-critical about the situation, and that means also to interrogate ourselves, our countries, the things we love. I love my country, and sometimes it's very, very difficult to do, right? But I love the people of my country and their infinite diversity and complexity. I truly do love my country. That's why I'm unwilling to relinquish things like the American flag to the far right. I'm unwilling to relinquish the Constitution to the far right. I'm unwilling to relinquish the American legacy to the far right. I maintain it as my own in its ugliness, in its night side and its day side, right? Critical of something I love, something I am. I can't get the American out of me no matter how much I try, right? So to acknowledge the situation, we also have to acknowledge the limitations, and we've talked about that. Not all academics can speak out. Some of our academics are in vulnerable situations. We want them to speak out. We encourage them to speak out, right, as much as they can. And if they can't because they're in that vulnerable situation, engage in metapolitics. Engage in metapolitics. That is, influence the students simply by teaching them the truth, right? Simply by teaching them the truth. Because even if they become an accountant, right, even if they become a dentist, you're going to change their consciousness, right, and direct it towards truth. And ultimately, if you do that enough, you change society. The politics follow the culture, follow the society, right? And so you're going to have those who are going to be out in front and center, who are going to say things. I come from an institution that encourages us to be part of the debate publicly because of its abolitionist past, right? It encourages that. But other ones, especially if they're big donors, as you all saw in Colombia, for instance, not at all. You speak out, you lose your job, right? And that's deeply problematic. But they know that's powerful and it works to silence people, right? So we have to speak critically, but not oikophobically. My chapter in the journal is about oikophobia, the dialectics of oikophobia. Oikophobia, actually I borrow from Sir Roger Scruton, right? The British philosopher, conservative philosopher, who oikophobia means the hatred of all things ours. And so he accuses the left of being oikophobic, meaning anytime Britain does something, you're on the other side. Anytime America does something, you're on the other side. And you can see that this is how things like woke and wokeness is being defined by the far right. That these people hate America, these people hate the UK, they hate Europe, they hate everything that's about Western. What all the West is rubbish. It's all just colonialism. It's all just imperialism when it's not. The West is as dialectical as anything else. It has its ugliness and it has its beauty. It has its truth and it has its lies, right? It has all the good that it brings about and it has all the ugliness that it brings about. And we have to think in that kind of dialectical way and not purely in black and white, that kind of binary opposition. Let me get through real quick and that'll be done, yeah. So one of the things that my doctor father Dr. Rudolph J. Siebert always taught us as students was to always be on the side of the innocent victim. Always. Doesn't matter what the innocent victim, what their religion is, what their race is, what their gender is, always be on the side of the innocent victim. I think if you maintain that principle, right, you see things clearly from an ethical standpoint, from a moral standpoint. It's really hard to muddy the waters of always being on the side of the innocent victim. And how we deal with that, there's a nice Islamic saying from Hadith al-Nawawi, which is a collection of the Prophet's saying. And in this hadith, this collection, this one saying, the Prophet says, whoever sees an evil, let him change it with his hand, right? Praxis. Go out and do something. And if he is not able to do so, then let him change it with his tongue, to speak out against it, right? As best as you possibly can. And if he is unable to do that, then to hate it in his heart, right? But that's the weakest of faith, he says. So at the very minimum, keep it in here, the understanding that this is wrong. Speak out if you can, and engage in radical praxis if it's possible. Right? With that, that's my speech. All right, question?
No, I was just going to say that I think what's super interesting about this moment with Trump is that it's so kind of just upside down that for the first time in a really long time, I can honestly say I can see what the United States is supposed to be. You know,
right.
The beauty of it.
You can see the light when it's the darkest, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, that it truly is this place that has brought so many different people from all over the world together. And I would always tell my students in my critical thinking classes, you're not sitting here stabbing each other.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I taught in one of the most diverse campuses in Southern California. I'm like, look, you know, we are sitting together in the classroom. You are all of different faiths. You are all of different class backgrounds. You come from all different walks of life. But you're not sitting here beating each other up and tallying each other off or trying to shank each other.
Right.
We're sitting here together and having a conversation.
Yep.
You know, like, this is beautiful.
Yeah.
This is what this is supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, thank you for the oikophobia, because I think we are truly in that moment when, yes, in the darkest, you can see the light of what the potential of it.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And when it's not perfect, we all know the U.S. Constitution is not perfect. It built ugliness right into it, but then it built the means to get rid of the ugliness
and
right into it as well.
And then you kind of see the black radical tradition in the U.S.
Yeah.
Why it was possible.
Yep, absolutely. Right. What was the appeal to? The appeal to the Constitution, the appeal to the Declaration of Independence in so many ways, yeah. I mean, because it's there. Yeah. It's there. So it's that dialectic of Jefferson. The slave owner, Monticello, you know what I mean? All of his kids he had with a woman who he owned, Sally Hemings. You know, he owned his own children as slaves. I mean, how horrific is that? And yet he writes the Declaration of Independence and all that Enlightenment language that he believed in, right? So, yeah. Yes?
Yeah. So, am I right in thinking that implicit in what you've said is that the project of critical social theory is part of the kind of unfinished project of the Enlightenment?
In many ways, yeah.
You know, in the sense that not to accept, you know, narrow definitions of reason or, you know, Western definitions of reason or what Enlightenment could be, but, you know, thinking self-critically, I was thinking, one of the phenomena we see in terms of social disintegration is you could call critical irrationalism, in the sense that you've got people asking questions that are in themselves valid, like, you know, where is power and control being exerted in society? You know, what are the structural conditions that give rise to these phenomena? But the answers they're coming up with are, oh, it's the Rothschilds and the Jewish financiers, or it's QAnon and it's a global conspiracy of paedophiles. You know, so it's not that the questions that, you know, in a sense, people are asking themselves valid questions, but if you don't have that kind of rational, you know, approach and the commitment to kind of test and validate and authenticate the grounds for the answers that you come up with,
Right.
then you can go down some very dark,
Yeah.
deep holes. So being critical is not in itself a guarantee of,
That's right.
kind of reaching the truth. You
Mhm.
need a commitment to a sort of rational in its most expansive sense,
Yeah.
pursuit of the truth and what
Yeah.
counts as a legitimate.
Yeah, I
So which goes back to Adorno's point about not foreclosing, not rushing towards an answer and prematurely holding it up as the last word, because that form of sort of positive dialectics is potentially open to kind of premature closure of history, whereas Adorno's approach is to keep that the critical side of the dialectic, but and the commitment to reach truth without allowing yourself to be kind of fobbed off with
Right.
cheap or limited or false answers.
Yeah, and that's one of the things with the critical theory. They don't create dogmas. They didn't create a blueprint for what society should look like. It was always in some kind of articulated in some kind of negative way. Society ought not to look like this. But in doing that, they're creating at least as Benjamin would call it, a constellation thought of what society should look like. It was a constellation. It wasn't a blueprint. Yeah.
I think
So just to that point that you just mentioned now, so can you just shed a little more light on that? You talk about the social disintegration, and you talk about the deconstruction, right? So once you deconstruct, okay, let's start from there. Once you deconstruct, so how do you reconstruct? How do you
Right. Well, and that's the really the key point, I think, in dialectics. And I've heard I've heard quite a few people actually say, "My God, you're still talking about dialectics?" You know what I mean? Like, the Soviet Union's gone; it's not in style anymore. Talk about dialectics, and like, I think you lost the whole thing. Then, I mean, then you're back to just simple binary logic or whatnot, and Aristotelian logic and all its limitations, because it's in the dialectical logic that you get the creativity, right? And so,
I think the other thing too, though, and I would challenge us if we're going to see each other again next year to think about this. I touched on the presentation, but I didn't get completely into it, is the idea of delinking. So delinking, going back to Okofoibe, doesn't mean in decolonial theory, get rid of everything European because it's the colonial thing. That's not what it means, because there's still so much here, right? Which is, strategically going back to someone like the wolf in the cannon, But delinking means decentering and making room to actually see other things outside of Eurocentrism.
right.
To truly bring those other thought forms into conversation, to decenter what has become Eurocentrism, because when we only stick to something like the dialectic, right? Why can't the dialectic be in conversation with a different mode of doing logic or illogics in a different part of the world, right? So, in terms of like the left and the right, that's still very Eurocentric. That's what I'm saying. We have to, maybe for next year, like, challenge ourselves to at least having researched some other thing that you can put into conversation with that. I think that's part of our process in learning to delink so that we can relink a different plural world history, because that also entails like a different direction of pluriversality. Literally means making a world where all worlds fit, and Eurocentrism cannot be at the center any longer. It just can't.
Right.
That pluriversality.
We're beyond that. Yeah, absolutely.
I think I'm just incredibly tired. I've got several health conditions and I'm just absolutely shattered. But I'm going to try and say something now what I feel like a bit spacer. I think what you just said there was wonderful, Martha, and I think that really fits with a lot of things that's been said. So I think Ben touched on it, I think Sayed Jabbar touches on it, and it's that approach which is saying, the job is to try to understand, not to judge and control. And so, so that idea about we don't just oppose or throw things away is to be critical of Eurocentricism, but to say that in sales language, maybe to say, like, there is a civilizational aspect to Eurocentrism, which kind of represents a certain worldview. It doesn't have to be the worldview, and it can kind of come into dialogue with other worldviews, not to be superior to. When Dustin was talking, I could probably speak to every single point that was on your slides. But one of the things that I've encountered a lot in my work, because I am overtly trying to be on the side of the factually innocent victims of wrongful convictions within the justice system. And what I was floored by this pushback that I've had throughout the last 25 years, where people go, what do you mean by an innocent victim? And I go, well, in terms of what I'm talking about, they did not do the act labelled as a crime that they were convicted of. And they go, oh, because then they go, well, do you mean legally innocent? Right? And so you get this willful just refusal to kind of to understand what you're saying, or just inability to understand what you're saying because of their commitment to law as they understand it. And so we have a justice system that routinely overturns the convictions of sex offenders and people who killed other people, murderers, because they were in some sense, they were obtained in breach of due process, and they call that integrity. The integrity of the system requires this, and that's integrity as understood within that legal system, as opposed to integrity that I would understand, and so you end up in all these battles about what does being on the side of an innocent victim even mean. And then the other week, someone was talking to me about the kind of architects, and I don't know if the book has come out. I think there may have been a book just come out, which is saying that the architects of the Frankfurt School, they were all Jews, they were all elite, and there's some really anti-Semitic critiques coming out now about the Frankfurt School and critical social theory, and it's all meant to try to destabilise, undermine, try to stop people to think critically. And I was like, how could you even say what you're saying?
Right.
And I think we're in really difficult times. And I think universities, they think they're teaching critical thinking in the way that you described at the beginning of your presentation. But they're not actually doing critical thinking because that's not actually allowed.
Right, it's reproduction of the already established. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where we're working. You almost have to teach the teachers how to do critical thinking, right? And how to be reflexive, and how to kind of be the way Martha was saying, decenter things without throwing everything away.
Yep.
Look at yourself in terms of where you are in the power relation, right? And not try and defend the indefensible, right? But just be open and to learn. But that's very rare. And you need to be quite secure about yourself to be able to do that. But this is exactly the kind of conversation we should have.
Absolutely.
Maybe this is the theme for next year.
There it is. So, yeah, I mean, yes, and yes. There's my affirmation, right? I'm usually negative thinking, but here's my affirmation. So, if there isn't any more questions, I would, I want to say how much I appreciate everybody for coming. We had long journeys to get here in many different ways from many different places. For the first conference for the ICST, it was a small conference, but I think it went really well. We certainly had more quality over quantity, right? I think everybody that was here for the right reason, to enter into robust dialogue, discourse, and debate on seriously important issues, as opposed to just simply to check off a mark on the CV and hopefully that gets you a promotion and whatnot. It's not going to do that for me. And so I thank you so much for coming and sticking through these 2 days and getting here. And I really hope that, you know, you consider becoming part of the Institute. And in order to do that, if you're interested in that, you just send me an email in a short bio, and we can get you on there. And then you become part of the group that will receive all the information of the things we're doing, the projects. We do a lot of publication projects, conferencing, and we're also looking into doing some more like online conferences as well. So an in-person one every year, or maybe one or two. In the future, we're hoping to do some seminars and maybe classes with different scholars teaching different subjects for so many weeks, things like that. So we've got big plans, and we'd love to have you help there.
And people, you know, who joined on Zoom, I mean, their contributions as well. Some of them are members of the Institute.
Yeah.
And just to encourage people to kind of, you know, the new journal is to think about publishing in the new journal. It's a
Mhm.
peer review journal. And I think that I've you know, I've published a lot, but, you know, without going into detail with every single publication, I've had reviewers resigning from journals because the other reviewers wanted to publish my article and they resigned their post. And so, I've almost every single article I've ever published has always been very, very difficult. Because sometimes, because of the nature, just one stupid example, it was to do with an article which was challenging. It was arguing about the need to be cautious in interpreting DNA science. And how the way in which DNA was processed and interpreted left innocent people vulnerable to being wrongly convicted. And in that particular journal, the review was, you know, what they're saying might be right, but we cannot tell the world about this.
Yeah.
And this journal doesn't do that.
No.
So this journal there is no agenda.
Yeah.
So
This is the journal of Socrates, not the sophists,
yeah.
right? Socrates for the truth, sophists for an agenda.
Oh my God, I found a perfect location for the conference.
Yeah, Greece?
Yes, I know Haimia very, very well.
Nice.
The Mosque of the Janissaries, which the city now rents out
Uh-huh.
for different events. That, it's right on the harbor.
Nice.
Would be perfect.
Perfect.
I've been there, Martha. I'm for that.
And I know a lot of the people there. I know the imam, the local imam, and I know the woman who
Nice.
takes care of the.
So you're doing the tour as well?
Yeah. Well, I know people there. I know the whole island.
Nice.
So I'm just saying, you know.
There you go. That's a possibility. So any possibilities that you can think of, suggestions, send them to me. So, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Okay, that concludes our segment.